This is the Get a Life podcast. Ex-Cult Conversations.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. We are back again with Ben Woodbury from Australia. This is part 2 to cover a lot of the stuff that we didn't get into. And that was a lot. I know we've dumped a lot of information on from his part 1, and we're just going to continue on with that with part 2. We're going to start off with something that showed up in the news in Australia with the Plymouth Brethren Christian Church being moved from Windsor. And so I'm going to open that up to Ben, and I'll let you, Ben, just give the viewers a little explanation, and we'll bring up the news article. And if you just want to inform people of what happened there.
Yeah, sure. So my understanding, I grew up in Windsor, like I've explained. My family were all here. A little side fact to that, we've actually been here since we landed, the convicts time. So we've been here for a long time, although we may have migrated around, but we seem to have come back to the same place. Windsor was kind of a controversial opening. Like, you know how the Brethren Church goes through phases of pioneering out to new places and supporting new testimony, like localities, areas. So Windsor was basically, I think Sydney might have been a bit full at the time, or there was like around the controversy of John Hales, the previous leader. There was a bit of contention, I think, and from what I've heard from other people's experiences, obviously I wasn't alive at the time, you know, the Hales dynamic, the boys of that age group, John Hales' age group and younger, his children, it was Sydney had quite a toxic bully, toxic masculinity sort of culture. And some people didn't feel comfortable. My grandfather, being one of those people, didn't really like the bully mentality within, or what was happening within that particular community, being Sydney. So although he wasn't the first, a group or a couple of people made the move from Sydney to move out to Windsor, which is like a 50-minute hour drive from where the Sydney community is. So it was pretty big. And the current leader, Bruce Hales, has never let it go. It was an act of defiance against his dad. And you'll see this pattern happen a lot with the current leader. It's always, in Sydney, they have the same mentality. You are constantly, Sydney was the worst, did the worst because they withdrew from John Hales 3 times or whatever it was. But in the same token, it's where the leader is. So you have this constant, you're fine, you're good, you're pumped up, and then you're flipped on your head. So you can never really get comfortable or be yourself. So I feel like the people that left that also bore the brunt of that. Like, I remember being in a church meeting in Sydney years ago where the current leader at the time, who has now passed on, of Windsor, was berated and bullied by Bruce Hales, told him that he was woolly between the ears and, what's going on out there. And Windsor categorically has lost a lot of what they'd call members. There was a period where, the wrong type of people were in lead, which unfortunately the Brethren community does create that environment where toxic bully people, like people with those traits, fester in. So they enjoy that game of picking on or bullying somebody that's not quite wealthy enough or of the same status, because they're, as much as they don't like to admit it, there is a status quo within the Brethren. They do believe in that system that, the Hales family is the royal family. So everyone else kind of falls into line as to whether you're powerful, wealthy, funny enough, engaging enough within the community. So it's all like, it's right down to the nobodies that have no money that rely on the next level up or the richer people to support them. And so with that came, people left back when I was I know somebody that's been out for 30 years. So I think I was probably 5 or 6 when I remember 7 or 8 families leaving this area, like being kicked out, and over silly things, like someone was kicked out for a fax machine or having pelments in the kitchen. They got Priestley's over. Whereas now you look at their houses and it's all excess, like pelmets are, a thing of the past.
So when you say kicked out, you mean they were excommunicated? They were like,
yeah, it was
totally.
like they were trying to find ways to, and not like the people that were in lead at the time, who might not still be in the Brethren for all I know, like from what I know, some are actually out because, they were wrong anyway. But the whole concept was, you create this environment for these type of people to become leaders in, and they're toxic anyway. So of course they're going to bully someone that doesn't, if they don't like somebody, they'll find a reason to not like them, and be that the fucking curtains that are in your kitchen. So I've spoken to somebody in the area that, they had Priestley's over the curtains, and when that wasn't good enough, it was something else, it was something else, it was something else, and so on. I have uncles that are out that, in the Western Australian time period, where, it wasn't, if it wasn't one thing, it was another. And, being 16-year-old kids, of course, they never wanted to come back to that group. So the establishment, or the original 4 founders of Windsor were, you could say, a disgruntled group from Sydney that left and weren't exactly in line with the whole John Hales becoming a leader. And clearly, obviously, Bruce Hales as well, because I feel like Bruce Hales really feels, or felt currently still, feels the trauma that he experienced of losing his dad, that separation, the 3 times he was kicked out, and when that trauma has stuck with him. And because he's a person in absolute power, well, why wouldn't you be vindictive? Why wouldn't you take that out on every single person that, from your memory, you knew was against your father? So
really, he's just a hurt little boy. But I think this perfectly explains his daddy issues. I've always wondered about why he's so infatuated with his father, and now you just
that's right, because he's never really processed that trauma and never had the means to, because in the Brethren you don't deal with mental health. Mental health isn't a thing. It's like, which I'll come back to, but it's like Russia in the 1950s, when Stalin's Russia was paradise. There was no murder. Like when that murder story of those children that were murdered, he must have been murdered by hit by a train, because we don't have murder here. It's that concept, that oppressive. I referred previous episode to their mindset, the Brethren mindset being primitive, but I don't even think it's primitive, because primitive still means science. To twist the stick, to get the friction, to get the fire. Whereas the fire's from God. Like it's that mindset that there's no science.
Psychologists call it magical thinking.
Yes, and where you don't look at logic, but you will when it comes to Bible verses, and you'll pick out homosexuality, for example. But in the next verse, when it says you wear the same cloth, or 2 different cloths, like a satin and a linen, you should be stoned. Well, why don't you focus on that as well? Anyway, that aside, back to the Windsor topic. It was founded on a very toxic breeding ground, basically, for people that were disgruntled with Sydney. And that has carried out and has seen, and I was no, rocket scientist growing up, but I noticed it. I saw the continual beratement of Windsor, of the leadership here. And it was a constant flip of, this one was in power, then that one, then my grandpa, then, he didn't agree. He said something that even more recently, I heard he was kicked out for 6 months because he said something in a break in a lunchtime, which was reported back to the leadership, that didn't agree with John Hales or Bruce Hales. And I don't know exactly what was said, or there's someone we could speak to more on this that has an interesting perspective on, because there's certain elect vessels, previous leaders, that Bruce Hales will not speak about. And if you quoted that scripture in the church, you just knew not to. Like it was something you didn't do. So there's even in that, there's a whole lot of psyche that could be unpacked there. But back to the Windsor story. like other places that have just become too much trouble, that is what Windsor became. After I left, I think another 3 or 4 left, which is a lot for a small town.
Yeah.
And if you look at the course of the history, there's probably 50 or 60 members, probably like, you know, in ratio, almost half to what was the original community. So we've got like Aberdeen figures here, right? Of some of a community leaving. Yes, it's over time, and I think, so then they bring back the root of that problem to being, and I can see that as Bruce Hales' reasoning, well, you didn't start out right, you were against my father, blah, blah, blah. So I heard from an inside source that there was 2 Zoom meetings, or a Zoom meeting with Sydney and just Windsor. And after the second one, basically, I can imagine it would have just been, you know, as to why Windsor wasn't, you know, what it should be, and all that, like it has been from a church meeting that I've witnessed. And it basically, from what allegedly they were sent an email, or they had to send an email or something after the second Zoom meeting with Sydney. It was an exclusive meeting with Windsor Brethren and Sydney. Apparently they had to send an email taking responsibility for the actions of the ancestors, basically, the dead people. And
what the fuck?
Yeah, I was like, tradition, ancestry, that's just peer pressure from dead people, right? So this, then they got like a 1-word line email back with where they had to move to. So with that knowledge, right, I didn't do anything, say anything. I did check in on my family, well, the one that did used to speak to me, my mum, and just made sure she was okay, because from where I was hearing and what I was hearing from community members, and I got messages saying, my mum hasn't stopped, not my mum, but this community member that was in there talking about her own mother. She said she hasn't stopped crying for the last 2 weeks, ever since she found out where she had to move to. She'd always thought our family members would be together. One's been sent here, one there, one there. Her biggest move ever was getting married and being, you know, she had to move to the other side of the country. All this, and then I heard that my uncle had joked about with another person within the community, saying that, again, I'm hearing this from other people, so I might not be quoting it verbatim, but it's the general idea. He joked and said that, well, might as well go and join the Anglican Church. At least they don't make you up and move. So it's been a huge thing here, and it wouldn't surprise me if from that come disgruntled people. They're moving in the peak time to sell houses, but you're still buying in the same market. So if you have a mortgage with it, and yes, you might sell your house for a lot, but you're still buying in the same market, right? So I can imagine a lot would have struggled with the money. But again, brethren help each other out, and that's where you become part of the system and indebted to, and therefore the control. So on hearing that, I then saw the article where Gareth Hales bought, the Sydney Morning Herald article where Gareth Hales bought his mansion in Dural. And I was like, or that area, I'm like, that's really odd that he's allowed to, you know, purchase a lifestyle property there. Like, the brethren were very, where we are here, it floods, right? But you had to go through a special committee to buy a house. And I know this because my uncle used to sit that committee, and you'd buy a house and it had to be above 19 meters. It had to be above the highest flood Windsor's ever had. It had to be in this area. It couldn't be too far out, because then that was lifestyle. So it was very controlled. And so I'm giving you this background information to show you what led me to speak up when a journalist approached me about the brethren here. And then when I read that Gareth Hales had bought this place, I was like, well, my uncle and auntie and family that all live in Pitt Town, which is not far from where he's bought his, I'm like, why is he allowed to buy something they would never be allowed to buy, due to the sheer size of the property, the fact that it's lifestyle. Yes, it has pools and billiard tables, but whatever, that's just how it was when they bought it. Like, they probably wouldn't keep that, but who knows? Nobody knows. And it also occurred to me, I'm like, well, not to be a conspiracy theorist, but that's the first property a journalist has stumbled across that a Hales own. Why wouldn't they own other properties? Like they potentially could own other investment places. Brethren are allowed to do that. If you buy a house and you aren't married yet, you can't rent that house out. You've got to stay at home with your parents and leave that house empty until you find somebody or it's arranged that you go and move into. So it's very, I'm doing this again, sharing this to point out the hypocrisy, depending on what status you are within the brethren.
Yeah.
And so on hearing that, I was, again, I was like, this is not all adding up. And then a journalist approached me and said, we've got a statement from the brethren. The brethren never give statements. They gave a statement and they're like, do you know Russell Woodbury? I'm like, wait, yes, I do. That's my uncle. So he gave a statement on behalf of the brethren saying, yes, because the journalist had worked out there was a lot of brethren moving the area, the whole area, basically. So it's like 250 people collectively, I think. And he basically, and you know when the brethren give a statement that they're trying to control the narrative, right? So you definitely know that there's something else because they put out these smoke and mirrors and a statement to try and be like, well, no, that's our story. So that then came this article, which I was not actually going to speak or have anything to say on. I messaged another family member, another uncle, and said, I've been asked by a journalist to make a statement. Apparently my other uncle is making a statement. Do you know about this? He said, I know nothing about it, which obviously I knew was a lie. So I was like, you know what? At least one Woodbury is going to tell the truth here. When she showed me his statement, there were things in it, and I don't have it here, but I think it was quoted there. Basically, it said, I don't know if you can see from the article, but it said basically, so that's actually my uncle's house up there.
Hang on.
It basically said that due to the flooding and the brethren recognizing the irony of this is not lost on me, the brethren recognizing climate change, that the brethren have never been, just a side note, they have never been more conservative or right-winged associated. So
here it is right here.
Climate change, it just infuriated me. They do not give a flying fuck about nature. They are not there. They're not in this world. Their mindset is, we are here for a limited time. We are here just for a brief moment. We do not get attached to this world. So they have that mindset. They don't care about the world. They don't care about
they don't give a shit about the environment because it's all part of God's plan.
There's nothing more absurd than the brethren using that statement. It's just infuriating. So that, and on top of that, saying due to the floods. Well, we all know that we're in it, that you had a very strict criteria as to where you could buy a house. And that being, it had to be higher than the flood level. It had to be in certain areas. You couldn't live over the river because you would be cut off by the river. They already had a mass migration back in the day when they used to live over the river. It's just, the whole thing was hypocrisy and lies. So I was like, you know what? I'm actually going to say something because you raised me to tell the truth. So I'm going to tell it. And that's why I got in there. And I just said, I actually debunk everything that they've said. I stand against everything in that statement because it's inaccurate and it's all lies and just basically sums up the brethren, hypocrisy at its finest. And that is not my uncle's terminology or wording. Let's just say literacy wasn't really his thing. So I know for a fact that's come from a higher power, someone far more educated, put that together in terms of a PR response and whacked his name on the end of it because he represented the area. So this here was my statement. My mother would never, my family got told to move to Katoomba. My mum, we used to have to interchange, go to a Katoomba church meeting randomly on a Thursday night. More so back in the day, we'd go every third Sunday before it changed. But my mum would do everything to get out of going there. She hated the cold. She hated going there. So for them to get moved there is the biggest punishment ever. And I know with a lot of other families, with where they got sent to was also punishment, basically. There's no way my mum would have been happy to move there or of their choice. So that's the other thing in the brethren statement that my uncle's name is attributed to. It said everyone got to choose or move to a place of their choice, which is absolute bullshit. Because as I know from the inside source that said, we got told where to move to, and you don't question that. You don't say, oh, what about here? What about, like, no, because if you do, you're against our beloved brother, the leader, you're kicked out. So it means, like, it's that communist mindset that you are, if you think outside of that, and it's that saying that the leaders often say, you do the doing, we'll do the thinking.
Yeah.
It's that mindset through and through, and it has been for generations. So when I actually approached my mother, I went there and just, because I never hear from them otherwise, and I just said, look, I know you're doing this and you're moving. She's like, oh, we're just downsizing. I'm like, no, you're not, Mum. You're not downsizing. This is your dream home. I helped you build it, for God's sake. Like, there's no way. I know you love this place. And I could tell my mum was anguished and not telling the truth, because why wouldn't I know my own mother? I'd been by her side for 24 years. I knew how to deal. I knew how she worked. And so I said to her, you've been told to do this, and I just want to make sure you're okay with it. And I could tell that she lied when she said she was okay with it. And then it came to a point where she was so frustrated with me telling her the truth and saying to her, I don't believe it. I don't believe that you moving to Katoomba is your choice, that she, in her frustration, admitted and said, I'm coming to it with God. And I was like, there you go. You just told me that it wasn't, in saying that it wasn't your choice, it wasn't your decision, but you were coming to it with God. So that meant you weren't for it. Yeah. And I knew in that moment, I had this whole moment of, like, I envisaged an umbilical cord being snapped, cut off. And I just knew that I was breaking a very toxic cycle that my family had been in for generations. And in doing that, I was hopefully opening up doors for others in the future. Because as you can see, it's all here. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to know this, to see this. It's literally right there in front of you. And you know, particularly if you're in there still.
You know, this I had a hard time believing too. Russell Woodbury's statement said, a committee was established to ensure all community members had somewhere to move to and that they received the support they needed to find homes and employment in their new community. Around 200 members were involved in the move to other parts of New South Wales, as well as interstate. And as you can appreciate, this has taken some time for the families involved to finalize. This was the part. The proceeds from the sale of the churches in the Windsor area will be proportionally distributed back among the church communities where members are establishing their new lives.
This is all lies. We know it's all lies. That is all a bunch of horseshit.
I would like to see the actual paperwork, bank account statements, and yeah, I knew that statement was a bunch of lies.
You know, Cheryl, you know you will never see.
No.
It's literally, you're lucky you got a statement. And this is what I mean. We know the bigger the lie, the more the church try to hide it, right? It's the same with the whole Adolf Hitler World War II mindset, because it's a very similar concept that, you know, you take away somebody's rights. I actually got a quote I was going to read that just blew me away when I read it. It was from the Mein Kampf, which is Adolf Hitler's, I think, journals or books.
Oh yeah, we had someone tell us that. He
said, and this is Adolf's words, the best way to take control over people and control them utterly is to take a little of their freedom at a time, to erode rights by 1,000 tiny, almost imperceptible reductions. In this way, the people will not see those rights and freedoms being removed until they are past the point of which these changes cannot be reversed. And you do see that when you look, a great book is Michael Bletchlard, his Australian journalist's book on the Exclusive Brethren. But you do see that because obviously we don't grow up with the history in the same way that communist Russia only hears the good part, like they think they fucking landed on the moon kind of concept. Whereas it's the same with the Brethren, you only hear about the good things. And Aberdeen, you don't go into, you never hear the tapes, you never see the transcripts from the meetings. Because why? Because you'll form your own opinion. And now that they're out there on the internet and you can go and look at these and read these and watch these, you can be like, okay, this man of God was heavily intoxicated. And so it's the same concept where you don't question it. You just do the doing, we'll do the thinking, we'll look after you. That blind faith, and I say it's pre-primitive, it's that mindset where you get cults that form, like, which I'd like to talk about, the Jim Jones cult, the Jonestown massacre, which happened, which I'd like to lead in with a story that I after finding out about this, it blew my mind that 909 people died, right, in 1978. Jim Jones massacre, Jonestown massacre. Jim Jones was a cult leader, created this cult. Everyone moved away to this compound, and hence the expression we know today, drinking the Kool-Aid, which I didn't know what that was until I Googled this and found out about it. And I drew parallels to the Brethren, right? Because every Sunday morning you have a sister, a female, that is outside of the room preparing what the Brethren call the blood of Christ. In a cup, it's port, alcohol. Basically, they bring it into the church on a Sunday morning at 6 a.m. where they pass it around, everyone must drink from. And if you didn't, you were either a known alcoholic and dealing with addictions, or you were of contempt. So you drank from it. And to the point where a baby is sitting upright with a dummy, so underage drinking basically forced on a child, where you give that child, dip that child's dummy in the port, everybody partakes of that cup of alcohol. So I said to my mum once, after learning about this, and I said, you trust our brother, right? Bruce Hales? Like, yep, absolutely. 100%, blind faith, you do anything he asks, yep. So what if he gave you a little jar called the elixir of the Lord, and you had to put 3 or 4 drops of that into that supper cup you prepare every Sunday morning? Would you do that? Of course. I trust our brother. He is our leader. He is the man of God. And
yeah, that's terrifying.
What if it was Kool-Aid? What if because obviously as you can see with what's happening with Russia and their leader, the older you get, and the same that happened with Hitler in his time, the more crazy you become, because you realize this lie you're living isn't real, and you start lashing out, because really, what do you have to lose? You're about to die. And Bruce Hales is we've heard that he's sick and ill and he's getting older, and that day is going to come when he dies. There's no rapture. Take all that out of it. Like that isn't going to happen, right? Because it never has and never will. And that concept is purely to keep people controlled, to keep this. If you step outside of that, you're going to miss out. And that's the biggest fear that anybody could ever have. So the concept of giving somebody the Kool-Aid, like Jim Jones, he was like, if I'm dying, they're coming for us. Yeah. You're all coming with me. And what's my biggest fear is what's to stop him doing that, or the next leader, or the next one, because it can't keep going. They won't keep up with society today, not with cancel culture, not with any type of social. They have to integrate, right? They have to, at some point, we're getting to a point where they have to have social media. They already do. That most of them already do, because I know, because they follow me on social media, or they view my stories, or they're a part of it. So I know the majority do. So at what point, it's not going to be long before that whole system crumbles. All it will take is one bad leader, which I see that happening in the next re-election of a leader. Either, I've got 2 candidates that I think are probable in mind, just because I was closer to the circle and I saw, what I observed. So, I do worry that we are going to have another cult classic example of the Jim Jones massacre idea. Might not be as gruesome, it might not be as, but who knows, it could be. And I would like to have publicly said it, so I can say, I told you so. Not so I can say that.
We've talked about it before. We brought this up before on the podcast. So it has been something that sits in the back of my head forever. It's just, it bothers the crap out of me.
And me too. Ever since I had that conversation with my mum, I have been like, oh my God, you can't even look at, she said, that's all lies, that's media. And I'm like, Mum, there's aerial photos of the 909 dead people lying on the field.
Oh, I've listened to the tape of them dying.
Yeah, you can watch YouTube documentaries with survivors, people that didn't drink as much Kool-Aid or survived the Kool-Aid, that talk about it. So that it happened.
And here's an interesting fact about the Jim Jones thing. Guess how Jim Jones killed himself? With a gun.
Yeah.
So take note of that the leader does not follow what he prescribes to his followers. He chose something completely different, and he took the fucking short way out.
But that's with every toxic leadership, Lane. Look at every toxic leadership. Yeah. It's the same.
And I want to get to a point.
Kool-Aid to die of Kool-Aid is so painful. He knew that. He would have
and
probably already tried that.
I don't necessarily think that that's going to happen with the Plymouth Brethren, okay? But I want to make a point about what you were saying about the Windsor move out, okay? And talking conspiracy a little bit. I wouldn't be surprised if that was a bit of a test to see what happens when he can order people to move.
100%.
How fast can this happen? Because I will not be surprised when the crumble starts to happen and the church starts falling apart because people start looking stuff up on Google and the internet starts seeping in more and more. I believe that there will be a mass exodus to one big campground somewhere. That'll be the PBC campground. And that's terrifying too.
That's right. And this is what I mean happened with the Jim Jones history. Yes, it was 10 years or however long it was until the massacre, but it was a seamless integration of taking away people's rights. And it has happened for generations. So we're at the point on the cusp of something major, whether that be a mass move out to a smaller or and he's often spoken about, like, I'm obsessed with people, or I like to, you know, test people, or towards the end, I'll be kicking people out. Like, we know he's grooming, the conditions are being groomed to get to that. And in the same way that he's prepping for the next person to come along, because obviously—
And all you want to do is go in there. I want to just go in there and grab my parents. And then I know it's against their will, and take them to my house and be like, seriously, just stay with me for a couple of years while this all falls apart, and you'll be grateful at the end of it. But you know what? We've had, and this is, Carmen, you can go a little bit more on this, but we've had people tell us that were witnessed. Was it John Hales? Who had the book Mein Kampf was in an office, and someone asked, was it John Hales, Carmen?
It was in a study, accessible by multiple of the Haleses, yes.
Yeah, and was asked why that book was, what was that book doing in there? And he said it's a great book at controlling the masses. So we know that this is, like, we know that this is being set up. I just don't know how people don't see through it.
It's knowledge, because knowledge is power, right?
Yeah.
We know this because we're enlightened as in knowledge. In there, you aren't allowed this. You aren't allowed access to, you aren't allowed to listen to these podcasts, because we're already branded straight away as apostate, the epitome of evil. So you shouldn't even listen to it.
And that's why they have that primitive thinking, like you were saying, right? Because you literally, no one in there is going, I wonder, why would Sky Daddy care where I live? Why would he care what town I live in?
And this is the battle I had with my mum, because I'm quite level-headed and very methodic. Like, I can really normally have a chat, but obviously emotions were involved when I spoke to my mum, because it's my mother. So you're stripping that back as well. And I had this chat with her about that. I said, so because of basically the sins of people that were here before you were even married off here, you're paying for those sins now, atoning for them. And because of what a dead person didn't agree with. Like, so if you lay it out like that, you're basically moving your whole life because of a dead man's opinion, realistically. Let's put it logically. John Hales is dead. He doesn't give a fuck whether you're here or there. So this whole concept, this whole trauma that Bruce Hales never dealt with, and deals with it like this, by retaliation, by bullying, by trying to control or manipulate people, is a total retaliation of something that he never ever dealt with and never will.
Well, one point just to make there, when I looked into the Jim Jones thing, I hadn't realized, I'd assumed that they were this really wacky way out cult.
No,
but they weren't. They were fundamentalist Christians. They were evangelical Christians. And
this
was
my point. That's what scared me, because they were normal American. They were normal people that moved to Ghana, wherever it was.
Yeah, and they were normal American citizens, like everyday people, and they followed this evangelical preacher who preached like straight brethren type gospel, nothing that the brethren would even have objected to. And year after year, it got more and more extreme, and they became more and more controlled, until finally they would all actually move to this tiny tropical banana republic just on his say-so. And the next step is, they all commit suicide because he says so.
That's
So-
why I know Bruce knows what he is doing. He 100% knows what he's doing. He knows how to put the tests out there. I was talking to an ex-member, this was a couple months ago, and she got into a conversation with her mother. And her mother, because they had given all their money to Bruce Hales, and the mother actually turned around and said, I would die for Mr. Bruce Hales.
And
it was like,
that is
my own priest said that to me, and he questioned me, would you not? I'm like, not really. And then the other thing that really shocked me in hearing, like, because obviously I've helped a few people leave, and hearing their stories, like, is really enlightening. And I think that's what's really helped me, you know, compartmentalize everything that's ever happened and put it everything where it is. So with that, a leaver told me that he really started questioning things the day he found his parents' will, because everything was willed to a man they had never met, to Bruce Hales. Everything in that will was to Bruce Hales. And when he questioned that, the mindset there was, well, our brother would know what to do. He's going to look after his children. Like that concept. And like, we know what has happened from previous experience. When children are taken away from their families and put with other brethren members because the parents weren't deemed fit or responsible enough to look after the kids, we know what has happened. Usually one of those kids has come away as sexually abused. That's the pattern here.
yeah, there needs to be a data on that, because I bet you it's very, very high on when children get placed into other homes. Like, yeah.
Yeah,
there'll be the diehards. Even with a collapse, there'll be the diehards that just want to die for him, or want to devote their lives. They're devotees, right? And they just want to devote their entire life to him. But
you'll get that, Lane, in the same sense that the people that don't like what any of us have to say here, for example, those Christian crusades will come after you. They will troll you on your Instagram, like I showed you last time, because, well, yes, you might not be doing what's right in terms of social settings, but I'm doing what's right for our beloved brother, for our group, our testimony. So I can be what I want. I could even murder for that man. Like, that's that concept. That they have.
I can go above and beyond any man-made law because Bruce Hales is above man. He's on the Jesus level and all the shit. And it's like, I feel like screaming in their face. What if you're fucking wrong? Like, what a wasteful life. What a waste of your life.
Unfortunately, no matter how much we do that, that will not change it. It's really got to be showing that, for example, that's why I stayed in Windsor. I stayed in the town where I was born, because I wanted my family, who all my life had told me and had this narrative in their head that I'd end up in the gutter. You'll never be successful. You never this. I've never been more successful or happy. And in my dad's eyes, he's like, well, you never do well with your business or be successful. I'm like, well, Dad, for me, success isn't money. Like, I wasn't, as much as I was raised with that mentality, for me, success is peace and happiness and a healthy, safe life. And with that comes a healthy job or a healthy business, and therefore money. So it's just a byproduct. But that whole concept and mindset of success equals wealth is a big one to change, because when you leave, most of the majority of the people that go back are because they don't know how to manage their resources, or they don't know how to find a safe group, because you have this, you end up trusting everybody or nobody. Like, you still live in the real world. You still can't trust everybody. That's life. We're all human. We're all flawed. So you either are going to let people down or they're going to let you down. You just have to be okay with that and learn from that and grow. That's where growth comes in, and that's where you evolve as a human.
And the brethren, like you can see it, like there's that love of money, and it's like stinks like desperation, right? Like they just are so obsessed with look, I'll be successful with how much money I have. Look at me, look, I'm successful because I have all this money. And it's like, yeah, but look how fucking miserable you are.
Power. It's synonymous with power, because I saw that growing up, right? I came from a family that worked hard and had money, and there were others that didn't have money, but then their sons came along and flipped a business and became multi-wealthy. And all of a sudden, they are Hales equivalent. They are with them, married into, it's synonymous. Power and money are synonymous in that community, which again is the same breeding grounds where the misogynistic, toxic, bully male culture comes from.
One thing I'd like to ask anyone listening in the Brethren, this is just a question to ask yourselves. What would you be worth if all your money was gone?
That's a very good question. I love
because
that
they have
question.
no sense of self-worth. This is exactly what it is. That the money is the only value that they have.
Yeah.
I think what a person is worth has no relationship to how much money they have. They're worth just as much if they're penniless or in debt. But in the Brethren, your net worth is your actual total worth, period.
And unfortunately, that is yes, we get that in the real world too. You are pinned about what your worth is. And particularly in my world, in the gay world, it's such a big thing because you do try and find some sort of self-worth based on your wealth or your fitness level or your talent or where you are in your career. So in a microscopic community, in a minority, it's even more accentuated and heightened. And therefore in the Brethren, you're synonymous with wealth is power and what you're worth. And unfortunately, any level of where you are in the Brethren, your self-worth is less than, because you already have all your rights, your basic human rights taken away from you. You just put up with mediocre. You accept that because this is the suffering way. You're taught all your life that it means you're on the right path if you're less than suffering. And so the majority have that mindset. They're happy to donate all their money when they die to the leader, all their hard work. Most of them in that culture live and work for another wealthier Brethren to pay for the next weekend they host another lot of Brethren, because in there it's expensive to live in there. It's expensive to be part of that community. You are, providing lunches and dinners, and I used to go through figures with some mums that have left, or people that were in those situations, and I had a taste of it because I was getting to the point where I was helping my parents out with buying things. I'm like, God, this was so expensive. It was, you really had to put forward the best of alcohol, the best of food, and that all stemmed from the Hales movement. It was never a thing before. From everything I've read and everybody I've ever spoken to, the idea of wealth or of a luxury lifestyle was not existent. It was kind of, you were in trouble for. It was not a thing you did. It was of the world. But come the Hales reign, that's all they care about. And all of a sudden, brands are a thing. All of a sudden, it matters what you're wearing, what scotch you're serving, how much you spend on your house, what car you're driving.
We're paying $450 for a headscarf.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean,
there's only probably 2 or 3 in there that would do that. The rest just want to look like that, so they go on to Wish and buy the copy. That's how it works. I see this. I know this because I see this in my career, right? I'm in the interior design business, and every year I go to the trade fair. All the Brethren women there are there scoundering around for the deals and the wholesale prices, and they all group together and get it sent to their husband's ABN number or address so they can, get what they can't afford at retail. Obviously, that's why they're there at wholesale pricing. I'm like, well, if you're here, if you need to pretend that you've got this wealth, why are you here? Don't bother pretending. Just if you can't afford it, don't buy it.
And I think the sad thing is that the people that do see through this, in the sense that they become depressed or struggling with things, right? They have no mental health care available to them. That is out of the question. Instead, you just get prescribed, right? You just get put on an antidepressant, and more control for Bruce, as he's got, I can just imagine how many people on antidepressants in there without therapy.
Yes. And this is a great segue into mental health, because I've wanted to chat about this. Brethren are such deniers of mental health. It's not a thing, and it's weak, and everybody has an aspect of mental health as you do physical health. And I look at it like this. When I left the Brethren, on my fitness journey, have lost 30 kilos. And what I did in the gym and what I do to eat and control what I eat, as in drink as well, got me to where I am today. So that gym or that health physically got me to here. So if I've had therapy for 3 or 4 years now, got me to here. So it's a journey. It's part of your journey. It's not just, well, I'm cured. No, you're not, because your life will throw you something else tomorrow. So it's a journey. So you should take these like as tools in your belt to equip you for your journey. That's why I'm such a big advocate for mental health and for therapy, because you do the work on yourself in the gym. I'm trying to show it that way so you can relate if you're into fitness. Why wouldn't you do the same thing for your mental health? Because without mental health, you don't have physical health.
Yeah. 100%.
Why would you take care of the car and never the engine?
Yes.
Exactly. 100%. And the brethren do deny mental health. They, in the same way that everybody knows that, well, when they never have suicide, they never talk about suicide, but there are suicides in the brethren. A man took his own life up the road from where I lived. I know this because they found him with the pills. The police report says suicide. The professionals like medics, doctors said suicide. But Bruce Hales intervenes and says, no, I've spoken to Dr. Roger, you know, that concept allegedly, spoke to Dr. Roger, and he said that wasn't enough to kill him. So the Lord got him first, not Satan. That's such a lie. Like this lie that they spin, and and you can draw references. Like they say, history never goes away; it repeats itself. 100%. You look at Stalin's Russian history, 1950s, where it was paradise, and the same thing. We have no murder here, so he must have been hit by a train when those children were being murdered. And Stalin came out and was like, what do you mean? This is paradise. We don't have murder. That level of denial they live in is very similar to the brethren culture, in the sense that they're like, we don't have mental health issues. That isn't a thing. That's of the devil. Psychology, counseling, that's of the devil. You don't do that. And it's that early 16th century, not even mindset, where anything other than is considered witchy voodoo. Like it's not a knowledgeable, holistic approach to life. And it's that mindset that the denial that Russia was in the 1950s, that murder doesn't happen here, nor does suicide. The Lord got to him first before the devil did. That my point is that it doesn't solve the
people
problem.
Are listening to this, and like, you're not the first person to say that suicides are very prevalent in there and covered up. But I'm like, I think the main point that I really want to get through in this podcast today is we're sitting here with someone an hour away from Bruce Hales, and who also, I mean, I've never met Ben. I literally just talked to Ben a week ago. And you have the exact same passion and feeling that I've had, and had to have sleepless nights over this whole, I do firmly believe that he is setting them up to, at the end, if it doesn't go the way he sees it going, he'll just order them all. He'll just order them all to be like, let's just go home. Let's just go to be with the Lord. And this is how we're going to do it. Because he is teaching in there. He teaches in there that it is better to take your life and go to heaven than to leave and go to hell. That is a very prominent
That's
teaching.
Jim Jones shit right there. That's Jim Jones shit.
I don't get how people are not freaking jumping on this.
That is a cultural thing too. Like that's generational teaching that has always been since separation. You have that mindset, you're better off to leave. And that is why people without knowledge, without exposure, do react like when you leave. So when I left, my sisters, my mum, all reacted to me like they witnessed me dying. It was fainting on the floor, screaming to God, like totally distracted from the fact that I'm going through an emotional turmoil to make the biggest move of my life, not being there present, yet turning away to outer resources to help because they don't know how to control the situation. My dad phoning somebody else, my brother praying at the end of the bed. Like it's a very, that generational brainwashing of it's better to leave, and you're told from a child, it's better to die in here because you'll go to heaven. Regardless if you're a fucking rapist, you'll go to heaven. You know, if you die in here, then leave. Like it's that concept, that mindset. So when innocent people like my sisters and my mum or family see or witness you leaving, it's traumatic. It's very traumatic for them and for you. And that's why every person, and if you're thinking about leaving, do it secretly. Cut off all communication until you're in a place, and like they do with a bloody aeroplane tutorial, put your own oxygen mask on first.
Yeah.
Look
Find
after
therapy
yourself until you're in a mindset to be able to speak to your family.
Yeah.
Get what you need out, take control of your finances. In Australia, you need your Medicare card, get your license. It's not a big deal if you don't, or your passport. You can always get that again. But just get a few good things, get your income together, find a safe network of people around you, and you'll be fine. You'll get through it. Yes, it's tough, but you know what? Diamonds are not formed without pressure.
Right. And the freedom is worth it. Right. Like I know Bruce Hales, I'm going to reiterate this again, is saying that, you know, when you leave, we deteriorate fast, and those that have left are deteriorating fast. It's not. We grieve. 100% we grieve. And it's not an easy transition, but it is a transition that is so worth you gaining back control of yourself. That is what you're fighting for. You're fighting to think for yourself, to feel for yourself, to move your feet by yourself. That's what you're fighting for.
And when you're in those lowest of lows, like you have those, because we're all human, we're not perfect.
Yeah.
You have those moments of being like, oh my God, I wish I had my mum. Like, I wish you had somebody to like you, because you aren't going to always have that network of support. This is why it's important to find that within yourself, because nobody looks after you as well as you do. So it's very important to find that, because when you have those moments, I use this tool. I go, well, I was in there 24 years. So give myself 24 years to be cool, you know? So coming up to my 7th year in April, there have been moments where it's been low, or it's been hard, or you grieve, because we have feelings, and as humans, and you go, well, actually, I'm only on, like, for example, the 3rd year out was difficult. The 2nd year, like, there are moments every year, but you are like, okay, I've give myself wait till I get to 24 years. And then if I'm really struggling then, but you'll be fine. You'll be fine. I can say that because
I've been out 30 years. I still cry over my family.
Yeah.
Every time my husband ends up in the hospital, it's my first thing. I reach my phone and I cry, because you know how bad I want to call my mother. You just want to talk to the woman that birthed you and has been there for you. For me, it was 17 years, right? That I don't know if that ever goes away. And I also think it's what keeps us human. I think it's what keeps us on track to make sure that we don't forget what we're fighting for, right? Allow yourself to have these emotions, allow yourself to grieve, allow yourself to cry. That isn't a bad thing. Be with yourself on that. Find friends who can support you through that. I mean, I have a long list of people I call now, you know, and I think Carmen's been a recipient of it.
It's so important to have that too. And it's so important. I cannot stress it enough. It's not weak to cry. I cry.
Ooh.
And it's important to sit and honor every single emotion, be that anger, be that sadness, be that joy. Like the most consistent thing you can have is peace, and that's what you'll find. But the other emotions, you can only have one at a time too. That's always a relief to know when you're feeling sad, like tomorrow, I'm going to feel great. And it's just moments like that. You sit and honor those emotions. That's how you get control of them, and you let them out. You don't bottle them up. And you have therapy and just do things for yourself. Put your own oxygen mask on first.
And I think because being in the Brethren, we were never taught that, right? You don't get taught how to deal with emotions, right? It's either of the devil or you're serving Bruce, right? And I think that is one of the things that it's super important to get. I mean, for me, it was therapy. I mean, I've done every possible type of therapy there is out there. And it's all about learning, how do I make this emotion my best friend in this moment? Right? You're sitting with it because it's going to teach you something about yourself. And that inner peace always returns. It always returns.
100%.
I want to say something to, you know, people listening, if there are on the inside too. There's something that's being programmed into your mind. You might not be aware of it, but it's being programmed in, and it's self-hatred, right? Yeah. To not love yourself, to look in the mirror and think you're disgusting, you're not worthy, and that you're just a piece of shit, and you have to make yourself worthy to maybe get into heaven. Fucking bullshit. Okay?
Yeah.
It's absolute bullshit. You can never learn to be truly happy if you do not love yourself. There is no time in the future when you have that massive successful company and that really fast car and everything's amazing that you will love yourself. Then you'll be happy. You have to love yourself now. You have to accept yourself now. Then you will not give a shit how much money you have because you'll just be content with yourself. If you can't be content being with yourself, then you have a problem.
And that's the materialistic mindset of the brethren, that like money equates success. And when I get to that position, I'll keep working for it. I'll be happy. And yes, most humans have that. They think that I'll be more content with myself when I have a fitter body. And I something I will openly speak about. I battled with eating issues and body dysmorphia, things like that, because of the conditions I grew up with. I had a very emotionally abusive father that, you'd even dare to think about seconds. He'd be like, do you really want to have that? You'd be the size of a horse, like that constant beratement as a child, and being bullied at school for being a taller, bigger, broader kid. Now I'm in the prime of my life and the healthiest I've ever been. I still battle with those images because that child still lives in you. You still look at yourself in the same mindset. And it's a big thing. That's why I say therapy is so important, because that's something I, am an ongoing work in progress with. And you might not understand that, but that's okay, because it's a personal journey, but it is there and it will be. So if you look at things like, and there's another point I want to make, social media doesn't show everything that is, you're feeling or going through. So it's kind of the better filtered glimpse of your life, right? So we are real people, us that have left. We haven't got all the answers, and we're okay with that. We sit with that uncomfortability, and we just get through another day. We live in the present, not fearful of God's judgment, not fearful of an afterlife that could be spent without certain people. It's that being present, it's being in the moment, enjoying the good few friends you have around you, and the freedom you now have. That's what life is.
Yeah. And we know that those very primitive years, right? And that's why I think why they don't look for people outside to come into this, right? Your very primitive years. So I take my first 17 years, and because my trauma started very, very early, like that, those pieces are indoctrinated inside you. And I might be working on them till I'm 90 years old, and that's okay, right? That is completely okay. But I do wonder if that's what makes the cult such a horrific, extreme cult, is because they allow so much trauma and bullying through those primitive years. And now that child is 17 years old and 18
has that
years
mindset.
old. Right. And the mindset is in there.
Yeah.
I mean, I battle the mindset all the time that I am worthy, that I'm, I have to do those affirmations all the time. I want to go into this bullying thing because the biggest bullies come from the top, right? I don't care what kind of anti-bullying program that they're installing into their schools. I mean, Ben,
that's all PR, right?
Right.
That's
your first podcast. I mean, it has not left me. I feel like I'm inside a novel that I haven't finished. And it's like, I allow it to happen because it's stirring something up in me. And, normally ends up in Cheryl rants. But like what you went through, Ben, was horrific. Absolutely horrific. And those PBCC, after listening, and we know they're going to listen to it, should be absolutely like, I can't believe the bullying you went through. Why do you think the bullying was so brutal where you lived?
I think it was very much targeted because of it. And it does, like they have this saying, I think it's even from the brethren, like a silver bullet, that the depth or the growth or of a company is only as great as the shadow of its leader, which is so accurate, because that type of, if you look at little things like trends or how, what cars they drive, everyone follows the fashion of the leader of the royal family, so to speak. So that bullying mindset, like I remember my first incident, like my earliest memory of one of Bruce Hales's children, his youngest son. I remember being bullied by him at a Sydney meeting where I walked around, and in like a girly voice, he was like, "Oh, Ben Woodbury." Like from a very early age, I was picked on for being gay or that feminine side that I'm totally comfortable with, that gay men do have. And because I think I was in touch with that, and just it was sort of part of who I was, I didn't hide it. I didn't try to mask it up or, you know, turn it into a tough exterior. I just went with it. And I think that's where the target stemmed from, not from that specific person, but I'm just saying in general, my comfortability in my own skin, as much as I wasn't, I just overcompensated, right? And became super confident. And I also think it stemmed from the leadership. You know, I've since found out that Bruce Hales never liked my great-grandfather, and therefore my grandfather became a target. Like it's one thing after that. And then my dad, you know, was, from what I've heard, was a bully and bullied other members that are now out and reported back to. And I remember incidents once where my brother stayed at a local house where there was young boys that would drink probably more excessively than normal brethren. So that's saying something. He then was, I remember finding my dad's journal where he had written down and had taken, after that weekend, my brother into questioning. And so kind of used us as like moles or rats. And I remember the next day at church, where my dad had obviously told his dad, who was the leader at the time, or an elder, and where they'd obviously gone and reprimanded that family. The next day at church, those older men who had kids my age were like, quick, we better not say anything. The Woodbury boys are here. So we were branded and bullied from parents. So their kids would have heard them speak about us, or my family, or my grandparents, or my parents. So therefore it was put onto us. Now, my brother didn't bear half the brunt that I did, because on top of that, I had the feminine, the gay side of me, which I, you know, was bullied for. So if it wasn't one, it was the other, and it was constant. It never stopped. It never stopped until I became big enough, old enough to stand up for myself, or make a scene if somebody tried to. So, and then I just never had friends. I never had trusted anybody. And this is, I think, one of the issues that I've faced personally is relationships, because I have always had disappointment from men. I've really found it hard to trust people. I've found it hard to find a relationship because of that deep-seated trauma.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think it's based purely on brethren. You have nothing else to talk about. You don't talk about the news because you don't watch it. You don't talk about anything else other than what's going on in that community. So if somebody stumbles or falls, it's gossip for a week. Like I didn't realize the ripple effect that I had when I left, until people have left and reached out to me from the opposite end of the world that I never even knew existed, that were like, you know, watching your Instagram story and following your journey has inspired me to leave. Like you don't know how damaging the effects of speaking about somebody else, that's just to give you an example, you know, can happen, and particularly on young children. So you're talking about other brethren members because you've got nothing else to talk about. It affects that child. That child has that tainted influence. If mum and dad think that about you. I actually experienced this myself, even as an adult. So I used to take my own car to the meeting because I didn't like hanging around. I used to go to every church because I loved wearing non-brethren outfits. Like, you know, I never forget the time I wore a massive collared shirt, and the leader's son-in-law said to me, he's like, you know, Mr. Hales has spoken about that, blah, blah, blah. On Lord's Days, you meant to wear long sleeve, blah, blah, blah. So I went and bought a short sleeve shirt with no collar. Like I wanted to stand out. I wore green pants on a Sunday with tan shoes when it was everyone in the interchange wore black and blue. So I wanted to make a point. So I went to every church meeting, but I would get in my car afterwards and just drive home, or I'd just drive around for hours listening to music by myself. So I was quite comfortable in my own company. But one incident after church, a group of kids were around my car, young kids scratching into my car, and these children's same parents, that Thursday night, two brothers, so their kids who were cousins, had come to me and approached me after the church. They're trying to, you know, take an interest and help you, and be like, we were out of the church once. Let's, you know, don't go, you don't need to go. Because they obviously could tell that I was, you know, I think I'd left for 2 weeks later. So going to the car, I was like, seeing this, and the kids said something, fag or something like that, or poofta or something. And I just had this moment of being like, the hypocrisy, again, these people that were trying to help me and persuade me not to leave, obviously had a conversation in the proximity of their children, who then, because a child doesn't think like that, these kids were just, primary school, who then took it out to find my car, or they'd obviously spoken about he comes in his own car, find that out, scratch my car, call me a poof. They used to call me, the kids used to call me a poof with a boof, because I used to wear my hair up in like high. The higher the hair, the closer to God. Clearly it didn't work. So it just made me think, even from in that mindset back then, I used to think about raising a family. I was like, how could I raise a family in such a toxic community?
Yeah.
I would just be bringing on another generation of children to be bullied because of who I was, because who my father was, because that cycle needs to stop, and it's going to stop with me. And that's what I've tried to do. And I think in helping so many people leave and other people leaving and inspiring them to look outside their own little world, if you're still in there, you can help break generations of toxic circles. Like you don't need to be a part of that any more than you do need to support it. Like I do believe if you know about abuse, or you and you do nothing, you're an abuser by proxy. You are.
Yes.
Because you're condoning it. You're
100%.
not no. Like us leaving is because we don't agree with the abuse or the toxic behavior that happens in there, and that's us not condoning it. And I've often said that to people still in there, and they're like, oh no, you tell us about who was raped. Like, that's not the point. You want to know the nitty gritty. Like, it's not the point. It's the fact that this happened. There are victims, it's.
Yeah. This is my issue right now.
Culture.
Go ahead, Carmen.
Sorry. The bully culture is really basically just a product of the bullies being accepted all the way along. There was a point in time where the leader of the meeting wouldn't have been acceptable for him to come to meeting and make a personal attack on people. And then what we saw is progressively, as that was accepted, as people didn't speak out about it, it became part of the culture. Then the bullies got bigger. And then it became an every night thing. You come to meeting to hear who's going to get balled out that night. I think that they've just built such a culture that as they gain more power and people in lead gain more power, they become worse bullies. And it just cycles down. Every generation, the bully is worse than the last generation.
Yeah. And, one of the things that Ben was just talking about on needing to get to the nitty gritty of details. This is my issue right now and I want to make this plea out to people outside and inside there, is that if one of your children came to you with like a horrendous story, would you not want to just put your arms around your child? Let that child talk, whatever it needs to say. Let that child cry. You're not going to be sitting there and asking about all these details. That's secondary. Your first thing is to sit there and hold space for that child to be vulnerable, for that child to feel safe in order to be able to reveal the details. I have a really, really big issue with this right now, of being interrogated and being like, well, what's your proof on this? And what's your proof on that? Like, are you fucking kidding me? Come live in my body for 24 hours. I guarantee you won't even think about that. And so with all these people coming forward of their stories, get out of your freaking head and get into your heart. I want you to feel versus think, because when you feel, you're going to feel that person's pain, and you're going to want to hug them. You're going to want to love them. You're going to want to create a space that helps them heal. You're not going to be sitting there thinking, oh, well, was this person that? Was that person that? Like, that's what's got to change. And this whole movement, inside and outside, that has to change. It's got to stop. We've got to stop with interrogations. We've got to stop with trying to figure out all the details. And we need to start freaking listening to people's pain.
And that's so important too. Like, you do get that mindset still that overflows from people that maybe have left the church later on in life, or still carry those ideals, and that's fine. That's totally fine. We live in this world, the real world, where you are allowed to believe whatever you like, but at the same token, you have to respect that somebody else might be not on the same page or in a different space to you, and that's fine. You're not You don't get a list on Friday and have to have them for the lunch. Like you're not having to have them to do with them. That's fine. So we can all have different ideals, beliefs, religions, whatever, or none at all. And that's totally fine. And I find that a lot of people do still cling on to that mindset. And like I did when I first left, I was like, I'm never going to lose my faith. I still believe in the rapture. I'll probably be raptured. Like that whole mindset I carried for a bit until I realized that, and you start to look at things like science and the fact that we have explanations for God-like incidences like Sodom and Gomorrah today. Like we have, explainable things like historical facts where you can look up and realize that Santorini was the biggest volcano that ever happened, equivalent to 32 atomic bombs. So of course there were tsunamis in Egypt at a similar time when there's a lot you can get into, and I don't want to have to get into that today, but just to give you an idea of people have different beliefs or mindsets, and that's okay because you don't have to be their best mate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
No, that's a good point. And go on, Carbon.
Nobody should get a pass for being a bully, for being mean because of their name. And if somebody would have stepped up when Jim Symington started to be a bully in the meeting and call people names and stopped it then, it wouldn't have grown. Now it's an out of control problem, and you don't get a pass because you're a Hales or because you're a Symington. That's the answer into it. If you're a bully, you're a bully. I don't care what your name is.
They have a culture of victim shaming.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you can leave one playground as a bully. You still carry the same traits in another. You're still a bully. Like I find that too sometimes with people that were bullies within that have left, or in the same case of you've got the Symington and then the Hales. It's just bully versus bully. It's you look back on it, and I always refer back to this, the whole idea of a royal family. It's just taken away the weapons, really. We live in a more civilized era where you can't fight. I swear to God that they would still fight like that, like they did kings versus kings, if they had the opportunity to. They would still stone homosexuals. They would still stone women that women like yourself, Cheryl, that speak out. You'd be a witch. You and I would be on trial today, probably drowned by this afternoon.
I was born on Halloween, so it would probably match my birthday. Okay.
But
go ahead. Go ahead, Lee.
If you're in there, okay, and you can get over the fear of leaving, right? Because that's all it is. It's just a fear of the unknown and a fear of the outside. I can almost guarantee you that one day you will look back and you will laugh at the brethren because they will seem so ridiculously silly. You'll laugh at them. You'll be like, this is insanely silly.
And I have like moments of that where I think I might have explained it last week, where I play indoor soccer and it's literally opposite where the Wednesday night church is. And except instead of driving back to my family home, I drive to my home. And I have this whole paradox thing happen on a Wednesday night where I'm listening to the same, might be an Eminem song that comes on that I listen to going that way home. In my own car. I'm now going that way home, and the feelings and the juxtaposition between my life now to 10 years ago, I feel like I know a story of a boy that lived in the same town that experienced all this, and now I'm living this life. That's how you get to a stage where your life is so separate, but in the same town, that you feel like your memory is just a story you were told. Like it's so empowering. When I drive home,
that's a great way to describe it.
I'm like, oh my God, I thought that me driving that way, the idea of driving under a truck or into a telegraph pole was a positive alternative. Now me driving home, knowing that I get to go to my home with just me in it and have whoever the fuck I want in it, and no one telling me what to do, is such a it's just such an opposite. And it's beautiful, and I love it. Just gets me so excited for life.
Yes, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, so I know we had a few things that we wanted to just expand on from your previous podcast. That I want to go into. You had talked about four points from Bruce Hales, and you got through the first two. Do you have those notes in front of you? Can you go into that last two?
Yeah, I've got them here. So I think I discussed, the first one was the struggle you're facing is Romans 7, the struggle with the flesh. There's no difference whether it's male or female. We all have to go through it. Romans 7, the struggle with the flesh. So I remember when that happened, I had this mindset of being like, and I always have stemmed back to this because it was a fulcrum point in my life, right? And it should be, if you're in the church, the point in which Mr. Hales intervenes or you get a word from, it's from God. So it should be. And so I do look at it because it did change my life so much. But I also look at it now in retrospect as an adult who has done a lot of work on himself. And I look back and go, yeah, I can understand why my innocent, not as knowledgeable mind then took it the way it did. But like, I look at it like, okay, if there's no difference and I'm going to use this example because I spoke to my mum about this. My mum's struggle with the flesh is no different to my struggle with the flesh. So if I don't have that struggle with the flesh and work on just being a good human and there's no fleshly desire in me, how are we any different? So what's the difference here with me being gay and you being straight? And then the second point was there are many brethren in the fellowship that have overcome it far more than those that haven't overcome it and basically left. So that was really sad to hear. That so many people in there are living unauthentic lives and basically unhappy, living a life that they never get another chance at. You know, probably, and we do have cases of people leaving that we now know about that were closeted, and it's just awful. They leave behind them a wake of destruction of kids and mental health issues that follow because you were dealing with the fact that you're broken up a family. But if you had the means, or where it, like, obviously 2023, we have the means, and society is a much safer place to come out in than it was back then. So I do feel for those people as well. And then the third point that he made, it's either filth or the fellowship. You can't have both. So this was that mindset that I spoke about last week of gay being synonymous with corruption, pedophilia. My grandpa, for example, asking whether it was the cows that made me, you know, start to think about being gay. I'm like, well, that's bestiality, so no. And then I know another gay kid that left that said to me, his mum puts it down to the point that she put a pendulum over her stomach she read somewhere in a Reader's Digest or whatever it was, that if it swung one way, it was a boy and it was the other. And because she did that, she invoked some demon and therefore he was gay. So it's that less than primitive mindset that we need to find a reason. There has to be a reason he picked being gay. Whereas if I was born with red hair or black hair, like it's just normal. Whereas if that was an issue, like it was in Hitler's time, where blonde hair, blue eyes was the superior race, that mindset, that's why I'm drawing the same reference here, because it's a very similar concept where it's a sin, it's evil, it's punishable by death if you are born a certain characteristic. And then the fourth point, it was the Lord Jesus is a real man and more than equal to your problems. He's been into manhood. Now I look back on that saying and I'm just like, what are you saying?
What does that mean? He's into manhood.
Jesus was
I always have my speculations about that, but we'll keep that for another podcast.
Well, yeah, I know where you're going with that.
He had 12 guys around him all the time. I'm just saying.
The irony. And yeah, so I do, when I look at this, I had a conversation with my mum latter years, and I said to her, because of the way I was raised, because that gay was synonymous with shit, it was nothing, like you push all that down in you become homophobic, and I was homophobic. I hated that part of me so much so that I wouldn't even pleasure myself. Like I abstained from sex and became like a monk. I did not want to think about it like it at all. Nothing would budge that. I was so ingrained with that, but I still craved the company, soulmate, whatever you want to call it, of a man. Mm-hmm. And I said this to my mum. I said, so do you lust after every man you see down the street? And she said, no, of course not. And I'm like, well, nor do I. Like, we all have tastes and standards and whatever you want to call it, types or whatever you want to call it, materialistically.
Mhm,
But
mhm.
if there's no difference, as Bruce Hales said here, whether it's your struggle you're facing is Romans 7, blah, blah, if there's no difference, then why are you saying there is? Why is there a difference? So it's the gray ambiguity of all that he ever says, that, you know, he'll give direction, he'll say this, but then it's left to everyone else to interpret it for you and yourself. And it's very, it's traumatic. It really fucks with you as a kid and as a teenager when you have these moments with God, so to speak, with Bruce Hales, and you are left in a worse position than when you began, and you are left reasoning or wondering. And I know what's going to come from that. People saying, well, you shouldn't reason, you shouldn't wonder. It's just his word. But that's unfortunately not the reality. And we're here to talk about reality, right?
We certainly are.
You know, I want to mention something about what you said about the flesh thing, right? So listeners understand. That is just a disgusting word for desire, okay? It's a disgusting word for it. And you need to understand, I hate the whole concept of this flesh idea, because it's like you have desires and you must suppress those desires and stop them from coming out.
But
Why?
if you look at it, if you study
do
language,
what you fucking want.
Yeah.
Because if you're a normal good person and you love yourself, your desires aren't fucked up shit.
Yeah, and if you're not like suppressed as the brethren are, you don't have those extreme desires where the only outlet is a fucking child. So therefore you're like, and I understand a lot of that is cycle too, because I know with some people it's generational of abuse, so they learned that behavior from their parents and vice versa. But there's also like the idea of sex, there's so much into that, like with the brethren, like and I know because some people have told me this, that they grew up thinking that you don't have pleasure, you don't have that natural, because the natural order of man is like dismantled, you do not give into that. You have those moments of where you like, and someone has said to me that they just thought their parents had sex 8 times because they had 8 kids. Like it's that function of life to procreate, like it's that. And I'm like, well, in the same way, when you're hungry or fancy a dessert or something sweet, like, do you have that same self-control? Or in the brethren case, alcohol, when you need that crutch because you need to disattach yourself from reality because it's so painful that you drink alcohol, because it's the legal, drug within the brethren that they heavily abuse, and everybody knows that, not just insiders. I'm not stating anything new here. And then you get the cases of people that just can't deal with it and won't deal with it end up in mental health hospitals here in Australia because of the fact that they can't deal with who they are or sit with the uncomfortability or haven't been taught how to. And this is why I come back to mental health. It's such a big, important part of your life.
Yeah.
There's one thing I want to chip in there, because I was actually trying to write my autobiography, and I came to the same kind of point you're describing, where you realize that you had this intense self-hatred, and that was one of the most difficult things to overcome when you left the brethren, because you hated yourself, so you couldn't socialize or make friends because you couldn't expect anyone else to like you when you had such a low opinion of yourself. So when I came to write it down, I thought, well, why did I have this low self-opinion? I thought, well, I look up what Bruce Hales was saying when he was saying in the ministry around the time I left. And I found this quote. This is 2011. This is Bruce Hales. He says, "Of course, you turn against self, really. You come to a disgust of self. You come to an abhorrence of self. You don't find anything there of any value in self." So that's the doctrine. That's the ministry.
Wow.
And listening I've never heard anything like that since I've left. And that is so triggering because of how fucking toxic that is. Yeah. And it's so meant. And this is said to children. This is said to teenagers. This is the word of God. People sitting hundreds crammed
and
into
they
those
love this guy
to hear to feed off, to live off. And they will go away from those church meetings where he says things like that and reiterate that and say that over and over and over until you get a teenager, an adult, that is sitting there hating themselves, wanting to cut bits off themselves because they can't bear to look at themselves in the mirror, because they must hate themselves because that's the way it should be.
Yeah,
that
absolutely.
is what he is saying there, is putting people into hell. That is hell. If any real hell, he is to follow those words is to hate yourself. And I'm not even religious, but if God created you and you have a piece of God in you, then aren't you hating God if you hate yourself? Think about that.
Very good point.
Yeah, that's the pathway to suicide, isn't it? I mean, that's
why
the more and more we unravel this, you guys, we know where this is going to end up if Bruce doesn't get his way. It really doesn't. I want to
take two steps backwards. Take 2 steps backwards from what you just read. He would not be able to control you if he did not get you to that state. Because if you have any confidence, that would come out in self-will, and you wouldn't believe him, and then he would lose that control. That kind of statement, that kind of disintegrating your confidence is absolutely imperative to have his 100% control of you. That's the only way he can control you.
It's to the point where it's as simple as simply liking yourself is a rebellious act.
Yeah. My heart breaks for those innocent children in there. Like, oh, my heart. Like, it's just to think of those kids in there that have no idea. I want to ask you a question, Ben. Like, I know we touched on this a little bit, but what, in your opinion, from what you have experienced in Australia, what you've experienced with working with your Mr. Hales' son-in-law, what do you feel is going to happen with the leadership position?
Personally, I think they're not, and given studying history, and history has a habit of repeating itself. And,
yes, it sure does.
Similar patterns between toxic communities and whatever you like, cults or whatever you like, any study on that, you can see they're not at the stage yet where they'd fully break away to, they'd have another Aberdeen crisis or more so, like they would become too secular, too small to be sustainable. They're not there yet. And they don't have enough wealth power behind them to sustain the few that would. Like, it would be too much of, and also they're navigating new territory here. Like, we live in a very open world where everybody can have an opinion, and a movement can cancel a culture. Like, we realistically live in that world where we can all stand up and say no, and a country will change its law without us having to go to war, without us having to. So we live in a very different world. And I think because they're like already behind 30, 40, 50, 60 years, they really struggle to keep up with that. So I believe, and from what I've seen, I feel like there will be a bit of a power grapple over the last words of what he has to say. I've witnessed and I understand the idea of grooming now. So I feel like the person that I used to work for, the leader's son-in-law, I feel like he has been groomed to become the next one, purely because I've seen and grew up in the same area as that person, and then watched that person change and evolve and become synonymous with the leader, in terms of his word is as good as the elect vessel. So all it is a switch of titles, really. One person dying, one person saying, hey, you're next. But the only conflict here would be the leader has raised very egotistical children, because you've grown up in a royal family situation that has happened from a grandfather passing down the throne to another, and you're in that family. You were already entitled as a child, so you're even more entitled growing up knowing that your father is next. Like, you're seeing that pattern, you think in your head, as much as they would never admit that, you're seeing that in your head that you could be next. So it's that entitlement, that ego that harbors and manifests here, right? So I think it would be like, I don't think the eldest child would get it. I don't think, personal opinion, I don't think Gareth Hales will be the next leader, because it's just too, I think he's too irrational, thinks too emotively. He would not, it would fall apart. And maybe that's a good thing. Maybe it's a good thing he became that, because he's very egotistical. He's very violent, as you saw from the video footage of someone filming outside of his house. Like, he, rather than speak, he'll act. He's very much a react rather than respond. And just from stories of people over the years, and the general knowledge of him growing up was that he was this bully, ego person, that they're the stories you heard from your own parents, or uncles and aunties that grew up with him, or relatives that grew up in the same locality. So, but then again, that's not too far from the stories that people outside here have to say about Bruce Hales when he was a teenager, or even outsiders that went to school with him, which is really interesting. But I don't know. I honestly believe that what I witnessed was grooming to, in my opinion, to become the next leader, the son-in-law, because it would be too, I don't know, I think it's too pattern. Like, they don't, as much as they like pattern and they like the idea of a royal family, I think it would be too, like, when JSH, John Hales, came about, that kind of threw a lot and cleaned out the church, if you know what I mean. Like, it got rid of a lot of rivals and was an opportunity. So I feel like the change in the deed to a different family would do that again. Like, it only kind of strengthened the control. But I don't know, like, I'm really young in my understanding of life, but I know what I saw and know what I know now from study.
You are very wise beyond your years, Ben. Absolutely. Okay, Ben, do you have anything else that you wanted to add?
There was something I was like, from my story, that I was like, oh, I forgot to talk about that. Let me just have a quick think. It's gone from me now. It'll come up again, but we'll end this.
And then to do with after you left, maybe, or like life. No, away.
It was in the lead up to leaving. Like, it was sort of as to how, like, in speaking to family members since, and how actually, just an interesting story. So I spoke to my sister, who they never speak to me now, but after I left, probably was a couple of years after, and she was reiterating, like, recounting her version of the story of me leaving, and saying how traumatic it was for her, and how they prayed, and they all had to have encouragement, and how they thought, it processed it, as I look back now, like a death, like I died. So I know where I was going now. And how she ran down the street after me in the car as her feet were bleeding. And I remember, my version of that is, I remember looking in the revision mirror, seeing my sister run down the street, like stumbling, running, like literally like she's chasing the last fleeting bits of my life. And that's how graphic it is. And she's like, my feet were bleeding, running after you. I ran, I just kept running and screaming. And I'm like, well, the reverse to that, I wasn't just like, bopping along to a tune in my car either. Like, I was driving down that road, seeing you, and I had held it together that whole time. And I was just screaming and crying, and I had never let so much emotion out in that poor little car. I thought the windows were going to crack, like, all the way to my new place where I had set up 2 weeks prior to leaving. And so I think I wanted to touch a bit on how traumatic it is to leave in front of your family. How I recommend not to, how I recommend to leave without them knowing, get a support network outside like I did. I had a place to go. I had started renting my own house, and I had sort of nested it, set it up ready for the transition. Like, and it will always be, and every person that I've helped leave, it's the same thing. You always project to leave in a year or 6 months. And for me, I was going to leave in 3 months. I left in 2 weeks. So once you set those goals and start setting out what you need, and what I've said for here in Australia, you really need to make it easier, your license, passport, Medicare card, and your savings, because I know there's that whole concept here in Australia where the brethren will get you to keep your wage earnings in the business, and they'll give you a better interest rate than the bank, I don't think they do that much anymore because they couldn't keep up with the 10% they promised. So young ones are encouraged to save for a house. So we'll keep, again, it's just control. We'll keep your money, give you better interest in the bank, and we'll give you a little bit each week that you need to spend. So you tell us how much you want to spend, and it's like a portion of your wage that you'll get to spend as a teenager. So try and get all of that, because it's really difficult, and we have to get police involved to get your money out. And it's just unnecessary trauma. You just want it to be as seamless as possible leaving, because you're already dealing with the fact that your whole world is being flipped upside. I remember when I first left, the first week, I was driving down the street and I was just like, what day is it? I had to look at my phone and go, oh my God, it's a Wednesday. Because when you're in that church, in that world, your life is so controlled by church. You go to church every night of the week. For outsiders that don't know, that are listening to this, every night of the week at like 6, 7 o'clock at night, you go to church. Saturday morning at 10 a.m. And I don't know if the times are still the same, because I've been out 7 years, but on Sunday it was 5 times for me. It was a 5 a.m. service, 10 a.m. service, 3 p.m. service, a 5 p.m. service. So your whole life is consumed within this routine of being part of this group. So you do not have time for anything else. And that becomes your clock, your body clock, right? So I remember driving down the street going, what day is it? What time is it? It feels like afternoon. And I'm like thinking back to last night, and it was just a blank. I just remember having this vision like of, oh my God, I don't even know what yesterday was. And I looked at my phone, I was like, Wednesday. And then I had this moment of clarity being like, I don't remember the Tuesday night church, what they called the word. I was like, therefore I couldn't know what day it was without, and it took me a bit, and it takes you like, so that's just one area of your life that you have to adjust, your timing, like the whole routine of falling into a new pattern, a new timeline. And it's so diabolical. The change is so much that your body experiences not only that religious trauma or whatever else you've been through, whether that be abuses. On top of that, you're building a whole new world as an adult. I remember the first time I ever had this experience of going to a haunted house, Luna Park in Sydney, right? I took the 2 kids that I was minding, my mate's kids, and we went to Luna Park, Sydney, went through the haunted house. I was fucking terrified, but I had this moment of experiencing, which I really am grateful for, all these things that I should have experienced as a child, as an adult, so I could come at them with an adult perspective and adult knowledge of how to deal with them. I had this moment of being absolutely terrified in the haunted house. And it was a very similar feeling of fear of the death doomsday preachings that I was getting on a Sunday. And I instantly knew how to deal with it. I shut off what I could hear. And I had this moment of putting their hands up to my ears in the haunted house. I was like, so much happening, but it was all in my head. And I was like, I'm no longer afraid. People were jumping out at me. I was seeing things. And I was just like, I don't fear anymore. I don't fear. And I had this moment of clarity being like, when I started shutting out what I was listening to at the church, the fear, I stopped fearing. I stopped feeling that gripping fear of, I must conform, I must do this, in the same way that I didn't feel the fear in the haunted house. So it was just a very like adult, and that's what another perk of like leaving, as an adult. And I look back as, yes, as a negative, the first 3 or 4 years had so many beautiful moments of growth that you could interpret as an adult, which you just didn't get or wouldn't get any other way. And I think like you have a moment of yes, it ages you inside mentally and emotionally. You have to age, you have to look after yourself, you have to, all of a sudden you're alone, right? Yes, you have a network of people around you, but at the end of the day, when you come home to your bed alone, you have to be comfortable in that. You have to be comfortable with yourself. And it's so important to do that groundwork. So then you're not relying on these crutches, because when I first left, I was dependent on alcohol for a bit. I'd get off that and go to the gym for a bit. And it's like this whole big seesaw of, I'm feeling great at a 10, I'm feeling shit at a 1. And right, that's not what life should be. It should be like an even keel of a 4, 5, 6, 4, 5, 6, right? With life, not this, I'm feeling great. And you find that sometimes when you go into a relationship too, like, yes, it's all 10, like if you were to measure it off a scale, or the next day it's all a 1, like that's not normal. That's not healthy. That's not what life should be. It should be just an even, peaceful 4, 5, 6. And that's when it becomes a comfortable journey. It becomes bearable. Life becomes full. It becomes peaceful.
Joyful. Yeah.
That is a
beautiful I think we got to stop soon because I got to get off.
Yeah. Beautiful way to end the show, Ben. We are so grateful. You will be seeing more of Ben. We have plans for Ben, and we hope Ben is going to come on board and help us get inside Australia and be able to work some magic there. So yeah, we're very grateful for you, Ben, for everything that you have shared over the last 2 podcasts, and we look forward to seeing you again.
No problem. I look forward to that. Thank you all for inviting me. It was great. It's been a good journey.
Take care, everyone. Until next time. Bye-bye.
To share your story or be a guest on the show, email info.getalife@proton.me.